My name is Linda Bottoms. I am the Assistant Church Ministries Director for our network. And I am really excited about our training tonight. We've had a great response for this, and I think it's very needed. And so tonight I want to introduce you. I want to get straight to our topic. I was talking to him before we opened the waiting room, and he said this is going to be like drinking from a fire hose. So get ready, get your notebooks out, get ready to get a lot of information. So Kris Moloney is our speaker tonight. He is the author of Defending the Flock. He's also the author of Active Shooter Response. So Kris, welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, to give you a quick little introduction to myself, I had spent 21 years in the Army, most of that time as MP. I actually started enlisted and turned over to the dark side and became an officer. If you're in the military, you appreciate that. I spent 18 years in law enforcement, a lot of that time doing crime prevention, crime-free housing, security assessments, all that kind of stuff. A lot of specialized training. And basically what happened to me was this, is that the church asked me to solve a theft problem. We had an old safe that's had the same combination for years and years. And they basically asked me, hey, we need new safes, we need new policies, procedures around this topic. And so I went ahead and did that. And of course, being thick-headed like I am, I didn't see it as a calling from God to do anything. So time went by, I just kind of ignored it. And then they came back to me and said, hey, you did a great job with that. Now we need to have some specialized training for our safety, child care workers. And so once again, did the kind of the same thing, put a lot of things together, brought in some specialized trainers and all that kind of stuff. And by then it starts sinking into me that possibly I'm being called to do something. And so I started my first team. And really back then, so this is 2009, as far as church safety and security was concerned, there was nothing out there. There was no books on the topic. There was nothing to find online. And so it was all kind of just generating this stuff from scratch. And basically everything that I've done since then, really I've done it first for my team and then share it with other people. So what I want to talk to you really about is why we need safety teams and how we can take those initial steps in getting them established. And so the first thing is this, is there's always been crime at the church. There's always been crime at the church. We're either ignoring it at times, or people aren't reporting it, or it just kind of gets swept under the rug. But if you look at crime statistics, and I use the FBI crime statistics, if you look at them, I've looked back probably since the early 90s to now, and you'll see the crime is just there. It's a real thing. Crimes are occurring at the church, either the church being a victim or people within the church committing crimes. And certainly, I'm sure you've heard a lot about this, abuse cases, embezzlement, theft from the church, burglaries, vandalism. I mean, now more than ever, we're hearing about vandalisms at churches, right? And we need to be prepared. We need to have some sort of mechanism in place to at least reduce the amount of crime or reduce our chance of these things happening. The next thing is violence towards the church. So Carl Chin has been tracking what he calls deadly force incidents. And what these are is anything that could have resulted in somebody being seriously injured or killed. From 1999 to 2017, there was 1,700 deadly force incidents at church. Now, what's concerning about this is two things. From 99 to 2008, the amount of violence, if you will, at churches was just slowly inclining. Now, that was concerning because for the rest of the country, crimes typically of that nature have been going down, but they're going up in the church. 2008 to now, that rate has just climbed and is just skyrocketing. It's getting much, much worse. Even in the year of Sutherland Springs shooting, where 26 people were killed, it was still the highest year. If you took those 26 out, it was still the most violent year against Christians in churches. And so the favorable status that the Christian church has had in America is fading away. You know, I'm not that old, I'm 50, but even when I was a teenager, the church was unlocked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it never occurred to anybody to go in there and cause any problems. Now, these days, that church would be ransacked and emptied in one night. Now, some of the reasons that churches are so vulnerable is not only the changing culture, but the fact that we're so open to the public, right? I mean, as Christians, we're inviting people to the church. We want them to come in. We want to have an open atmosphere. And so people know when we're open, when they can walk in. They know there's going to be a bunch of cars, maybe some of them unlocked, that are going to have things in there that they can kind of walk through and still. They know when we're closed and we don't have events. They know when they can go there and they can spray paint on the side of the building or break in. They know we typically have money in our churches if we're not emptying out our safe every week. They know that we have instruments and sound equipment and computers and office supplies. I mean, we're one shop stop, for all kinds of very valuable stuff that people want, either for drug money or just to improve their financial situation. Our buildings are often unoccupied. Certainly they are at night and sometimes during the week. Once again, they know that. All they have to do is look up your church online and they have that information and they know when to strike. And so we have to be thoughtful about this. We also have to be thoughtful about the crimes that happen within the church. Embezzlement. Embezzlement is a huge crime in churches. And even a small church can have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars just taken, a little bit at a time over a long period of time. We have to be prepared for this. Domestic spillover, addiction, alcoholism, child abuse. And so if we foolishly think that somehow this is not going to happen to us, just like every other church that didn't think it was going to happen to them, and we don't take actions to stop that or at least reduce the risk. But we can do things like eliminating temptation in the case of embezzlement, right? If you have accountability in that system, then what you're doing is somebody who might be tempted now isn't tempted because there's that accountability. It's things like that. It's things like knowing who, I call it intentional ministry, right? People are struggling with life and sometimes they fall through the cracks. And those people that fall through the cracks are the ones that are in danger of causing a disruption at church or becoming violent at church or even having an active shooter event. So we need to be identifying people as a safety ministry and then setting up real programs to help those people to mitigate the risk, to reduce that risk at the church. And so I hope I have you mostly convinced, but I do understand that there is some pushback when you talk about having security in the church. Well, the thing that kind of surprises me about that is God has always called his people to serve him for his purposes. He gifts people in so many different ways to perform to be the hands and feet of Christ in the world. Your soldiers, your cops, medics, firefighters. And what you're going to find out as you start moving forward is there are people in your congregation that have the gift of being what I like to call a sheepdog. They're a companion to the shepherd and a protector of the flock. They're just wired that way. All kinds of people and people in just different walks of life are kind of drawn to that. I want to protect my family. I want to protect my congregation. And so we need to acknowledge that is a gifting and let them do what God has called them to do, is what it really comes down to. We see in Luke 22, verse 36, then Jesus asked them, when I sent you out without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? Nothing, they answered. However, he told them, the one with a purse should take it, and likewise a bag, and the one without a sword should sell his cloak and buy one. The way I look at that is when Jesus was here, yes, he's telling Peter to put down the sword, but now with Jesus returning to his Father, he's saying, listen, people are out there that want to destroy Christians, that want to destroy the kingdom of God, that want to destroy what he's doing through the church on earth. And so we need to acknowledge that there is a call, that Christ himself tells us that there comes a time to sell your cloak and buy a sword. So moving on from that, I'd like to get into some basics of the team and starting the team and how you might organize it. The first thing you probably notice in everything I've said, I've been talking about safety team, safety ministry. I do not use the term security other than in a very generic way. And the reason I do that is for a couple of reasons. The first one is security is a legal term in many states. It might be in your state, it might not be. But next time the legislators meet, it could mean something. And security means of somebody typically who's licensed and trained to perform those types of duties. And so if you claim security and you're not licensed security, you could be, basically you're claiming to be something you're not, number one. And number two, you could be opening up the church to civil liability. So you can imagine, let's say, a mother is going through a divorce and she comes to the church and says, do you have security? And the church says, yes, we have security, when in fact it's just volunteers. Then something bad happens and she finds out later it's just a group of volunteers. You can see how she would have a good lawsuit against the church. The other reason I don't like security, the term security, is that there's a certain image it creates for some people. I've spoken to hundreds of churches and they all struggle to get a security team started because of the image of the security, that word security, like it's gates and barbed wire and all this other kind of stuff. It's just a word to avoid, and that's why I use safety ministry. Now the responsibilities are essentially the same, but it doesn't have that negative connotation that security does. The next part is talking about how you might organize. If you can get this thing passed by your church board or your leadership and some buy-in from the congregation, you're probably going to want to organize this using three components. The first one is a safety committee. Now, safety committee, maybe that's your elder board, maybe that's your pastor's advisors, or maybe it's just a group that's created from the congregation. And what this group does, usually made up of people that might have law enforcement background, military, medical, childcare, maybe legal background, maybe insurance background, those kind of people that can come together and start to evaluate the different things that the church does, you know, from the service to the special events to what's happening on with the kids. And their job is essentially to write policies to identify those risks and figure out ways to mitigate those risks through writing policies. So that's that one level, that's that leadership level. The next below that, you have the safety director. Now this is your main person that's running this ministry. It's the ministry director. And their responsibility is to be a liaison between the committee and through the team members. Now they're probably part of the team, you know, they're out there patrolling, they're part of doing all that stuff, but they're basically the one that is in charge. And their job is to make those policies happen, to enforce those policies, or maybe a better term, to educate others about those policies so that they're being followed and there's some sort of accountability. As a former soldier, one of the sayings is people don't do what you expect, they do what you inspect. And so that's the safety director. They're inspecting. They're making sure that things are happening that the way they're supposed to happen. And then below that safety director, you have your safety team. And that's where the rubber meets the road. These are the people that that are basically gonna be patrolling the church during events, during Sunday service and all that good stuff, watching and paying attention. And they're, like I said, they're where the rubber meets the road. They're the ones that you're going to be investing in as far as, equipment and training and those types of things. Now, when you get started, so if you decide to organize that way, and other churches do different ways, you have to find what works for you. You know, I can tell you a lot about what other churches have done, but if you're a church of 20 people on Sunday, that's probably your safety ministry is probably going to look a lot different than the church that has, 1,000 people come through the door on any given day. And so you have to figure that out. But this recipe, the way I just explained it, works best for a lot of different churches. So once you get that in place and you have those people and you start having those conversations, the next step is launching your first program. Now, I can tell you from experience and from talking to others, if you walk in there on day one and say, hey, Sutherland Springs, White Settlement, and you start naming off all these active shooter events, and you say, hey, we have to have this, gun, all the guns and people trained on the team. If you go in there and that's the first project you want to get in place, I can almost guarantee it will fail. It's failed so many times, and so many people have called me just expressing their lament over, hey, I'm trying to get this thing going, and I just couldn't get it going. And it's because there's so much pushback when you talk about violence. People are very afraid. They're very afraid about these things. And that fear, that very real fear, triggers them. Now, you could try to go in there and tell them all the stats and mention how the violence is going up in the church and all that kind of stuff. The thing is you can't use fear to argue people out of their fear. And so what I actually recommend you do is starting a program that's easy for people to accept, easy to buy into. And so this is where I talk about fire evacuation. Just starting a emergency fire response plan of, possibly putting out small fires, doing inspections to ensure that our chances of fire occurring is actually pretty low, practicing fire drills with the kids, if nothing else, is a really good way to kind of introduce the idea of safety ministry to the rest of the congregation. And they start to warm up to you. I can tell you, parents are going to love it when you have those kids marching out in a straight little line going out to an assembly area. They love it. It shows that you care about the kids and you're thinking about them. All the churches that I've spoken to, like I said, hundreds of churches around the nation, when they start small, that's really the way to success.
Okay, so let's talk about the best way to promote this to the church. How do we promote the church safety team? To the church. How can we say, hey, we want you to be a part? What are some ways to highlight them and celebrate them before we need them in a critical situation?
Well, I would, like I said, kind of starting very slow with them. I would say, hey, we're going to put together a safety ministry, and their job is to start identifying some of the risks that we might have here in and around the church. And one of the first programs we're going to work on is fire evacuation for the kids. And just leave it at that. Just say, we're just going to start this one thing. We're looking at emergency medical response, getting some people trained, and maybe put together some medical gear for special situations.
How often do you involve the entire church body? I assume Kris means in the training or that kind of thing.
A good example would be like the fire evacuation training. Now, if you're lucky enough to get this done, doing it in October, Fire Month is a good time. The kids are doing fire drills at school, so it's pretty comfortable for them to do it at church as well. And so that would be one church-wide event. One of the things we do to kind of spice it up is we always have like bouncy houses and a hot dog and casseroles and all that kind of stuff. We kind of feed them, and it kind of turns into a church picnic. And so what we'll do is we invite the fire trucks, and the pastor will announce this. We never do surprise drills. Is the pastor announce, hey, this Sunday is the picnic and fire drill. And then after the last prayer, he says, okay, we're doing the fire drill now. So follow the directions of the ushers. And we do that once a year and nothing more. And some of those years we don't get to do that, and we just do the kids. And that's done once a year in October, because that's kind of the beginning of the year. It's easier to get the kids ministries involved, or at least that's been my experience. So they almost like it when we say, hey, we're going to practice, a tornado drill. And they're like, yay, we're just having fun. They get to go out in the hall and put their heads between their legs. I mean, that's pretty easy. But as far as the whole church, it's about that one time a year. Now, that doesn't mean that you couldn't have more. I just found that, at least for me, it's almost impossible to get buy-in from the pastor and the board and all that kind of stuff to have something that can be quite disruptive. One of the things we'll do is when we do drills with the kids, we'll hand something out, we'll make a flyer, and we hand it out to the parents. Today your kids are going through a fire drill. Today your kids are going to do a lockdown drill. Today your kids are going to do that. And part of that flyer includes what their responsibilities would be during an actual event. And that's really the best I've ever been able to get for training, if you will, the congregation.
Well, Kris, thank you so much. If no one else has any questions, if nothing else is pertinent and you're like, I just am ready to get his material and get started, then we're just going to thank you so much for attending our online training tonight. We do these, especially church resources. We did one about hospitality earlier in the year, church hospitality. We do these regularly. And whenever we do another church security thing, we'll be sure and email you and let you know what's going on. We just want to make sure our churches are resourced efficiently and that they've got the best quality that we can give to you. So, Kris, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.